even weirder than the Elmendorf beast, and there are photographs on earthfiles.com. But before that, William Henry interviews Philip Gardiner about, among other things, bioelectric fields found around the Shroud of Turin. It is absolutely fascinating. And for our subscribers, I have a second meditation in the new Crop Circle Meditation series. And I have to be honest with you folks, this is getting very, very amazing and frankly awesome, because I was actually working on a meditation about triads and triangles, which is a very important starting place, when suddenly over Stratford in England, a formation of UFOs showed up, seen by hundreds of people, that assumed a triangular pattern. So this is the pattern we're going to be using for this meditation, but it doesn't end there, because almost at the same time, another crop circle formed that we will talk about next week that relates to the gateway that we talked about the first time and to this triad. I have to be honest with you. I think we've got some teachers. And now here's William.
Welcome, everyone. According to the Jewish legend of the forerunner of the Messiah, during the end time, a figure known as the peacemaker will appear who will assist the Messiah in carrying out 7 wonders, including showing the 3 holy vessels of Solomon's temple, the Ark of the Covenant, the flask of manna, the cruse of sacred oil, all of which disappeared mysteriously. He will lay the holy scepter, the rod or wand, before the Messiah, who will wave it and perform miracles revealing the ultimate secrets of the ages. What is this rod or wand, and what is the Ark of the Covenant? Are these actual technologies or merely metaphors and allegories, symbols for a mysterious, perhaps divine power? Joshua 6 tells us the Israelites used the Ark to destroy Jericho. What military power does this device utilize? And who would most like to find it today? And when they find it, is the Ark empty, or will it be full? Here today to enlighten us about the esoteric mysteries of the Ark of the Covenant is author Philip Gardiner. Philip is an author and researcher of several books, including The Shining Ones, The Serpent Grail, Gnosis, The Secret of Solomon's Temple Revealed, and now The Ark, The Shroud, and Mary. Philip's website is gardinersworld.com. That's spelled GARDINERS world.com. Philip, welcome to Dreamland.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a great pleasure to have you, Phil. I tried to read The Ark, The Shroud, and Mary at the airport and on the plane while traveling to Florida recently, but everywhere I went, every time I held it in my hand, people came up to me and said, now that looks like an interesting book, and a flight attendant literally dragged me to the back of the plane to talk about it. So, you know, she, like me, says, I always wanted to know about that stuff, and I'll bet you get a lot of that, don't you, Phil?
That's very nice to hear. Yes, I get a fair bit. Yeah, when I'm out speaking and what have you. But most of the time I'm out alone, researching. So I'm kind of unrecognisable in most places, thankfully, still.
Right, but the subject matter is just so alluring, and it's funny that on one leg of this trip, the guy beside me was reading Graham Hancock's book, The Fingerprint of the Gods, and of course, Graham's Sign and the Seal is like perhaps the benchmark book on the Ark of the Covenant, which was published in the early 1990s. Did Graham's work influence you in your research or your quest to learn the secrets of the Ark of the Covenant?
I'd be lying to say that I didn't read Graham's book several times over, and it's really become the place you have to start when you're looking for the Ark of the Covenant for a great many people. So yes, it did, certainly. It even took me off to Ethiopia. So after I'd finished the book, what I'd already found is in the book, but when I got to Ethiopia and to Axum itself, and I got a translator with me, but I'd learnt a few words, and I asked the guy, the guardian, if you like, at the church, do you have the Ark of the Covenant in here? And he because I'd asked him in his own language, he says, no, we've got a slab of stone. So it's what they perceive to be the Ark. They still call it the Ark. To them, it's still the connection point to God.
What word, Phil, would you say best describes the Ark, in your opinion? The crucible, the casket, chest, instrument, device, relic? Where can we begin this conversation in a single word to describe the Ark?
Oh, that's not that easy a question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a good one. Personally, I'd call it the Ark, but because that, to me, from etymology, the language, the science of language, it covers the whole thing perfectly, and was chosen for that respect. You can get down an awful lot of routes with this, and I did try to cover them as much as possible in the book. Specifically the relic. Is it a real thing? Did it ever exist? And speaking to several scholars about it, Jordan Maxwell and others such as that, who categorically believe that it never existed and that it is purely an esoteric device within the Bible, probably stolen from their Egyptian sojourn. The esoteric side of it is what I concentrate more on in the book, although I did do a few things with a local university with regard to the energy aspect, which I know you're so interested in. With respect to the battery, could this thing build up a charge, for instance? So we did go through that, and we did do some virtual technology to see if that was the case.
I'd like to go back to a really interesting, an eye-opening experience that you had yourself at Winchester Cathedral when you came upon an image of Moses and the Jews carrying the Ark of the Covenant. Talk about that experience and how it changed your perception and altered your path of research.
Well, this is a strange story. See, I had no intention whatsoever of writing a book about the Ark of the Covenant, the Shroud, or Mary. None whatsoever. My path was taking me a completely different way at the time. And I was there giving a speech, but Winchester is a peculiar place in England. Anybody who knows English history will know that in the 16th and 17th century, we gave the Catholic Church a good kicking and booted them out of the country, basically, and became what's known as Protestantism, and it's a very German thing. And we created the Church of England, and there were pockets in England that were still very Catholic, and Winchester was one of them. And the reason that that's important is because these areas in England that were still Catholic have maintained a lot of symbolism within their structures, within their churches, whereas the other ones we kind of whitewashed over the paintings and smashed the windows and broke up the sculptures. But the other thing in Winchester is, which I didn't put in the book, but I was researching an ancestor of mine, Bishop Stephen Gardiner. And there was a couple of bishops in my histories. I've got a very strange genealogical history, which goes right back to Roslin, amazingly.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, Roslin itself, most people will know that, but Roslin is built upon a brae, a Scottish word for field or an area of land. And it's called Gardiner's Brae. That's my ancestor that named that place. Very interesting indeed. So we have some heavy discussions about genetic memory, so that's quite interesting. But Stephen Gardiner was there, and so I was trying to find his mausoleum. And the pictures that you see in the book, and what I talk about in the book, is this mausoleum where on one side there is an image of Moses carrying, and the people of Israel, carrying the Ark out of Egypt with the Great Pyramids in the background. And on the other side of the mausoleum is Jesus emerging from a coffer, looking very similar to the Ark. He's the new covenant, and that's the old covenant on one side, coming out of Egypt, which is actually incorrect, isn't it, biblically, because it was once they were supposedly out of Egypt proper. I mean, even though Canaan was part of Egypt. They were coming out of Egypt. They made the Ark after that effect. So if you speak to people like Tim Wallace-Murphy, who's a great expert on symbology, it'll always tell you if there's something that's incorrect biblically, placed in symbolism within a church, you're being told something. And what he said there kind of struck me. And the fact that we've got the old covenant on one side and the new covenant on the other side, there was a link there to me that something was being said. And I wanted to get to the bottom of it. And on one corner of this mausoleum, there's an image of Prudence, a female, holding a serpent and a book, the Book of Knowledge, and the Serpent of Wisdom, which, of course, in Christian terms, the serpent's been victimized heavily. But on the back of her head is a male head with a beard. She's got two faces, a feminine and a male. And this, I immediately knew, my background in Gnostics and the gnosis element of all this, immediately knew that there was a Gnostic truth being suggested here. And so that kind of sent me on a journey to find out what this esoteric truth was that was being told about on this mausoleum.
What was that esoteric truth then, Philip?
Well, it's not that easy to explain in a 5-minute segment, but which is what the whole book is about, really. It's the Gnostic truth that people like Carl Jung identified had existed and been maintained through alchemy in order to divert attention from the church, heretical inquisitors. Gnosis is a concept, and it's Greek word. It means knowledge, but it's a spiritual knowledge. And ultimately, the language itself, the etymology, means the mystical experience of the divine in the self. Now, you can see why that would be heretical, because if you could experience the divine in the self, you don't need to go to church and pay your tithe on a Sunday, do you? So you don't need to listen to what the priest's saying. You need to listen to your inner voice. And the concept, the image of prudence with male head and a female head, is the Gnostic concept of balance, the kind of Manichaean approach of good and evil, of light and dark, positive and negative, and something that is found in all cultures of the globe because they understood that our own mind is divided and dualistic, and that the perfect place to be is in the center, is neutral, neither one nor the other. And, you cannot get into the temple if you walk into a pillar. You'll hurt yourself. You can only get in by walking in between, in the point between the two pillars, which were always symbolic of the male and female. So you can only enter that temple and connect to the divine in that neutral state, something that the Grail law tells us, something that the temple tells us, and the Gnostics told us, and of course alchemy tells us as well.
Philip, as you're talking about this dualistic head of prudence and how it symbolizes balance, you have the male bearded head on one side and the female head on the other. I'm thinking about Baphomet, the Templar head or relic as you're describing this, because it's portrayed as the face of a bearded man, but yet Hugh Schoenfeld has shown through the Atbash cipher that Baphomet is a code word for Sophia, which is traditionally a feminine concept. Do you see a Templar connection in this symbolism?
Beyond all doubt. It's my understanding, my opinion. I don't say belief because I don't have beliefs, because I think they're too strong a word. But I have opinions in which can alter according to evidence. But it's my opinion that the Templars, the truth that the Templars discovered in the Middle East was gnosis. And if you actually do the scholarly thing, you actually read original texts that are around about the Templars, you find that they were in touch with people like the Sufis, the mystical element, people believe, of Islam. Although, I have evidence that the Sufis were around much longer, way before Islam. Sufis themselves, the word Sufi itself may come from the word Sophia, which etymologically can be broken down and means light of the serpent, light of the wise serpent. So that's a fascinating story in itself. But I'm of the opinion that the Templars, when they were there, the thing that they discovered was the Ark, the Grail, all these things which mean the ultimate wisdom that we can obtain for ourselves, that is within ourselves. And yes, Baphomet, of course, with that much cipher, wonderful that it means Sophia. But if you break the word down itself, Baphomet, into Baphe Metis, you get Baphe, which means to submerge, and Metis, which means wisdom. So you get that submergent into wisdom. So that's the beauty of etymology. It's a wonderful tool.
Absolutely, and as you're talking, I'm reminded that metis also means stone, and so when you're at accident, they tell you, "Oh, we've got the stone slab." Well, it could be the stone, a symbol for the stone slab of truth. Very interesting.
Well, absolutely. The philosopher's stone. It's derived originally from Sabiism and the worship of the stones, which are always said to have come down from heaven. But that stone, that philosopher's stone, is something that's within us, and we have to use all the forms of alchemy, the reductionism, to get rid of all those layers of nonsense that we've developed over our life in order to be able to reduce that down to find the core stone that's at the center of ourselves. That's the gnosis that's hidden within alchemy.
So if we have to take a break for a moment, when we get back, I want to explore further your thoughts on the connection between the Ark and the older traditions of Egypt. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back.
Later in the show, Linda Moulton Howe has a report for us about a new animal found in Texas, like the Elmendorf beast that Unknown Country studied last year, and this is even weirder. Listen to this.
The overbite teeth and the two teeth from the bottom up may be what is being used to puncture and suck the blood. Possibly. That is correct.
Don't miss Linda Moulton Howe the last half hour of the show, and go to earthfiles.com to see photographs of this animal.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're continuing with Philip Gardiner. Philip, in your book, you've got some very interesting material on the connection between the Israelite Ark of the Covenant and previous or older Egyptian arks. Talk about that connection and the importance of tracing the ark technology or relic device back to ancient Egypt.
Well, it's I could have gone any number of ways, and I do in the book, but particularly for Egypt, it's certainly something that's is a relic, and several hundred relics in Egypt, of course, which are arks. And, even Tutankhamun had them within his own tomb, and that's just one that we've found, and there are several others. They match the biblical ark in a great many respects, not just in the makeup of them, as you know, because I've been looking at your website. Mm-hmm. Not just in that respect, but in the sacred geometry of them as well, in the mathematical makeup, if you like, the ratios. They match. But what does it all mean? And that's the key to what it all means lies in much more ancient times. And the Egyptians were just another culture, fantastic, long-lived culture, which were continuing something which was much more ancient. And you can go back to 5000 BC and you can find rock art in Scandinavia depicting great ships, arcs, with the solar orb between the prows in the perfect neutral place of the ship, looking very much like an upturned crescent moon, of course. Mm-hmm. Something which later on became useful for Mary and, of course, Isis in Egypt. So the upturned crescent moon is a symbol of the ark. It's the ship, the boat that can traverse the underworld. And there are many levels to this. One of the levels is, of course, the astrotheology. It's the Isis constantly chasing Osiris around the planet. The ship that dips below the horizon and travels into the underworld, which is, of course, the other side of the planet. And it became very linked, of course, to the seas. People couldn't get across the great vast of expanse of ocean, or it was believed so. I don't personally believe that. I think they went all over the world. But so the seas were seen as an entry portal to the other world. It's somewhere you cannot survive. So Mary, in etymology, is linked to the sea, as in mare, and the horses of the sea. And, this is why she's depicted with a boat all over Europe. And Isis, of course, who had the ship of light. So the ark is everywhere, to be honest, and it's incredible that it's missed in that context in most ark books. In India, I went to India because something drew me to the fact that I'm of the opinion, as well as most some scholars and certainly the Theosophists, that India is key to the history of ancient civilizations, including Egypt. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the Brahmin of India influenced the Essene, the Druids, the priests of Egypt, and vice versa. So India itself was a great draw because I found the ark still today being traversed through the streets on great wheels, and the Victorian Christians misnamed it the Juggernaut, which we all, of course, now know as a great lorry piling down the highway, which it, of course, isn't. It's named after the trinity of gods known as Jagannath, carrying the gods in an ark through the streets, parading him so that the people could see it. It's no different to what was done in Egypt. You yourself know that in Egypt, the ark, they had a couple of arks. They had one that they were constantly repairing and a spare one to use, during their processions. So they had many arks, and people always manifest things, which is itself etymologically means to bring out from the mind. So people are always bringing out from the mind these objects. And I've been to several Freemasonic lodges where I've seen now at least 12 arks, actually perfect replications of the biblical ark. So they're manifesting these things in all cultures. And, the reasons are great. There are a great many, but I'm of the opinion that it is deeply within the psyche of man, because from his earliest days he travelled the globe in boats, and the land was too thickly, there was too many trees, and the foliage was impossible to get through. So he followed the herds, and he went around the seas and the lakes and the rivers in little boats like coracles, and these became so greatly important to him that they've stuck in the psyche of man, and they're on rock art all over the world. And it's an incredible subject that a boat, a bark of Egypt, should enter the psyche of man all over the globe like that.
Yeah, it is interesting. And when you trace back the Egyptian tradition, you're often confronted with the idea that it was beings from Sirius or energies from Sirius that stimulated human evolution. In your view, is the Ark of the Covenant an extraterrestrial device? Have you seen any evidence to suggest it was brought from elsewhere in the stars? And the reason why it is such an important symbol that is carried over the waters of time is because it links us with our place of origin.
Well, I think you know the answer to that because you've had the book. But in the books that I've written so far, I have been concentrating solely on down-to-earth and internal dialogue things that go off inside our own minds. And in that respect, it has been, to me, perfectly possible for man to manifest these things and these archetypes also from within himself, and for perfectly ordinary astrotheological and survival reasons.
And note the pun on the word archetype, right?
Sorry?
Note the pun on the word archetype.
Yes, well, absolutely. I get told off a lot for using the word archetype. You can get too complicated with archetypes. But yeah, that said, I don't rule out what you said at all, because I'm firmly of the opinion that we are not alone in this universe of ours, even in this galaxy.
A follow-up question, Phil, would then be, what's the connection between the Ark of the Covenant and the Great Pyramid?
Well, in December this year, I've got a book coming out called Gateways to the Other World. And in that, I go through such a hellish journey of science and quantum physics, meeting scientists from all over the world trying to grapple with certain things. And one of those things is the inner connection of the mind of man to something greater than himself. Now, that can sound strange, and that can sound like I'm talking about God. But it can also mean we're talking about what the ancients knew as the Akashic records, or the void of the Indians. It's the Great Pyramid in the new book in December. I will show some evidence to suggest that was not a burial place. I don't think it was ever a burial place. Certainly not built for that purpose. But it was really something. It really was a gateway to another world.
The Ark of the Covenant, Phil, the dimensions are given as 45 inches by 27 inches by 27 inches. And this is thought to be the exact volume of the stone chest or coffer in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. And some people believe that it sat in that room. Do you believe that the reason why the cubit dimensions of the inner chamber of the Temple of Solomon, the Holy of Holies, are precisely identical in size to the King Chamber in the pyramid is because the Great Pyramid was the original Solomon's temple?
I totally and utterly agree with that statement in entirety. How can I say any more than that? It is that both physically and esoterically. And the purpose of it, is to contact.
Very good. Let's take a break, Phil, on that note. We'll come back and we'll pick this up and talk more about the Ark as a generator of cosmic power. What is it making contact with? This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're continuing with Philip Gardiner. So the Holy of Holies of the Temple of Solomon, where the Ark was housed, be it, as we're discussing here, either the Great Pyramid originally or perhaps a copy of at some other location, that Holy of Holies was a divine space where divine energy was concentrated and where an especially powerful experience took place that was only partaken of by spiritually perfected people. Because, as you note in the book, the uninitiated could not endure that divine light. Let's talk about what that Ark as a generator of cosmic energy must have been, and how did it charge our body with cosmic power?
Well, good question. I could answer it in so many different ways. The uninitiated cannot see the light or this divine light, because they have to go through a process. You have to go through a process as known to the Gnostics and the alchemists of getting yourself into balance, into a neutral state. And to try and even comprehend entering this physical, mental aspect, you would be entering hell. You would be taking all your baggage with you. And, there are things that can jump out of your unconscious mind while you're in this state that we are going to be talking about, which can terrify you. So you can enter a physical, mental hell, quite simply. So the Ark, the pyramid, and a great many other things, to me, are metaphorical, metaphysical, and physical devices to aid man's access to an altered state of consciousness. The question is, what is that altered state of consciousness? How profound is that? Is it just a psychological trip that we are having ourselves and fooling ourselves via evolutionary, biochemical, electrical instincts within our mind, within our brain, or is it truly a connection to another dimension? And is that other dimension the answer to things such as aliens and ghosts and fairies throughout time and all these other things? I'm of the opinion that man, for an awful long time, well before the Egyptians, right back to the very first serpent-worshipping caves and the 80,000-year-old Neanderthal man discovering, his connection to the earth. I think that man has, throughout time, discovered within himself an ability to access an other world. He has created devices. He has understood the earth energies. He has built upon locations on the planet where subtle earth energies at specific frequencies appear. We are screwing all this up, of course, today with all the things that we're doing to the planet, but man understood these things. I seriously do think he understood these things, and he did everything he possibly could to get back into it, into the states that some people get into through drugs, which is not recommended because you will end up in hell. Other people, like the Sufis that we spoke about earlier, will dervish, will dance in circles, and, they say that is to access the divine. And then you have to question what the divine is. And the divine, of course, is the mind. And so there are many methods that can be used. You can take yourself up to a cave. You can be alone, such as Muhammad, for instance, who met Jibril, in that altered state and contacted the divine and came back with all his supposed wisdom. There are a great many different methods that are used and still used today. In India, people will know of a process modernly called the Kundalini, the coiled one, because that is the process of raising energy within the body, which is all linked to the great light and the shining, which is why we get the term shining all over the world from ancient cultures. I know are in the Bible, and from Mesopotamia right through to Egypt, the shining is a big etymological key and clue to what we're talking about, this inner enlightenment. The thing is, for modern people today, not to think that they can go off into a cave or they can pray or meditate or do all these things in order to get this enlightenment and suddenly they'll be wholly perfected ones. They won't. You need to listen to what our ancestors told us over thousands of years of research of their own, that you must be balanced and you must know the true self. You must find that true core, the stone of the philosophers, and be in balance before you even try to get into this state.
Phil, as you know, we have a presidential hopeful in the U.S. named Barack Obama. And in the book, you talk about the sacred word baraka. What does this term mean, and how does it relate to the Ark?
Well, baraka, the term that's used by the Sufis mainly, is argued over extensively by Sufi scholars. However, getting to the core of it, they all agree that it is the term used for the essence, passed from one to another. Essence is a huge word in itself, and I really do recommend people go and look up the word. But baraka is something passed down from one generation to the next, from one initiate to, from one adept to the initiate. It's carried on throughout time. It is linked etymologically to bark, the Egyptian term for the ark. It's linked to bark for a tree, which is obvious when you understand that the tree is the axis mundi, the gateway to heaven. Mm-hmm. And that, Jesus had to be pinned to a tree, and Osiris and Krishna, etc., etc. The tree is ultimately important, which is why the skin of it is named the bark. Named after, of course, the sacred vessel, which takes you from one dimension to another, as we've been discussing. So baraka, as bark, is ultimately important in that respect. Breaking it down etymologically, you also get the bar and the ka of Egypt, the spirit and soul, mm-hmm. and the ra, which right in the centre, where it should be, in the solar boat. So, that's a bit of a funny etymological, exercise, a bit of a humorous one, but the rest of it is incredibly important and is also linked to things known as the blot rites, the blood rituals. And as you know, you had to sprinkle the blood of the sacrificed upon the ark. It's incredibly important, the blood ritual, to understand this concept.
That gets me back to a question I wanted to ask a moment ago. When the initiate is standing before the Ark of the Covenant, when the perfected one is standing there, do these human operators then sacrifice their own bodily spiritual energy in order to power up the Ark?
Well, you can ask the question, what do you mean by powering up the Ark? Because we'd have to go into some science to do that. Powering up the Ark as far as getting themselves into a mental state, offering your own blood or the blood of a sacrificed victim, whether it be animal or human, and seems to have been almost forever part of man's history, although certainly not when he was in the period before he settled. In the hunter-gatherer period, he was a very relaxed kind of guy. But after that, we start to get into blood rituals. And, the blood, it's sacred. It's so sacred to man that's why the etymology is linked to it, and that's why all the blood rituals are linked entirely to getting into this state. Whether that charged something up, I didn't really look into that. It's charging of the mind that I was more interested in this book.
Mm-hmm. And on the subject of sacred blood, Phil, why don't we shift gears and talk about the connection now between Mary as well as Jesus and the Ark of the Covenant? Mm-hmm. And with the intention of getting to the place where we can start to begin to really get a clear understanding of how that image on the Shroud of Turin was actually formed. So why does the crescent moon symbolize Mary? Is the moon the symbol of the Ark of the Covenant, and is Mary herself the Ark?
Mary has forever, in Catholic circles, been known as Archifidoris, the Ark of the Covenant. She's the Ark of the New Covenant. She carried the light, if you like, Jesus, within her womb. The crescent moon, of course, was therefore a great symbolic device for her, whether we believe she, as the character in the Bible, existed or not. That's what appears to have been done. There are numerous scholars around the globe who have pointed out again and again and again that Mary, all three of them, are aspects of older religions and older cultures, such as, Isis, who was known as Isis Mary in the mother aspect in Egypt. She was also known as the Ark. She was also known as the carrier because she carried Horus. Horus, of course, was also known as the Christ, K-R-S-T, the Christ. He is not a separate entity to Osiris, his father. He is actually Osiris reborn on the morning sunrise. Osiris is the dying god who goes down at night, and Horus is Osiris reborn. As Jesus states, I and the Father are one. It's all of this Judaic language, and even language of Paul later, seems to be related to the Egyptian period. That is not to say that people didn't exist that had their lives taken over in textual form later on and had all these devices hooked onto them. We know, for instance, that in Judaic law there is the true teacher, the teacher of righteousness, and that they expected one in each generation, and the Essenes certainly had their own leader in that respect. Was Jesus teacher of righteousness? Was he a true teacher? Was it James, his brother? There is some evidence to suggest that James was seen to be much more profound at the period. I don't believe we have enough evidence at this moment in time to pin all of the biblical things that Jesus and Mary did on as real and physical, literal things that were done. Instead, I am of the opinion that they point out other truths about ourselves. Mary has a ship of light. She is the mother of the light. She is the one who connected to the divine. The divine spoke through her, just like the Ark of the Covenant. And in Catholicism, for all its woes, has done some credit to themselves by keeping alive a lot of ritual and a lot of symbolism, wherein was hidden a lot of this stuff. And so, in that respect, it's quite good that they did keep Mary alive, even though they did ostracize the feminine aspect to a great extent.
I find it so interesting that the Ark of the Covenant was covered with blue cloth when transported from place to place. Blue is the color Mary wears in iconography, and to the ancient Egyptians, blue was the color of truth, true blue.
Absolutely. Yeah, I didn't point that out. Well done. There was one wonderful church in Abu Ghosh that I went to near Jerusalem, which just says it all symbolically to me. It was fantastic. It talks about balance, and it talks about the shroud and the ark, and it's a wonderful church. Now, I would really recommend anybody to go there as long as you take some guards and a few bulletproof vests. But because I did have a window pop out through my bullet. But it's a great place. If you look at the front of this church, this is a place where the ark actually resided according to the Bible. So that's important, that they built this church on a specific location where the ark was said to reside and collect this energy. On the front of this church, you stand there and you see Mary stood on top of an ark, which is itself covered by the shroud. And she is carrying the baby Jesus. If you walk around the back, it's an incredible sight because Jesus grows as you walk around, and so that he becomes equal to his mother. So you've got this perfect balance. It's fantastic.
Wow. Incredible message. Phil, we've got to catch a break for a moment. When we come back, I want to talk in some more detail about the Shroud of Turin. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. Phil, one of the incredible links that you make with the Ark and Mary is the link to the Shroud of Turin. How did this come about in your research, and tell us what it means?
Well, it came about because one of the things that I really love is etymology, and I've done the schooling on it, and so when I read words, it's kind of strange. I'm like one of those peculiar people who can see numbers in the air, etc. When I see words, I see a multiple layered word and almost the history of the word. It's a very peculiar thing when I'm reading things. And when I was reading about the Ark and Mary and all these other things, the etymology of it just struck me incredibly because, some of the words used for the Ark, for instance, Aaron, that's a word used for the shroud too. Sindon, etymologically, could be related to the moon god, Sin. And Sinai, where Moses went to create the ark and get the law from the divine, or collect the stones that fell from heaven, or whatever you want to believe in that respect. So etymologically, the shroud is linked implicitly to the ark. What got me into that, but then when you start to look at the shroud, of course it's related to the ark anyway. Even the Catholics say that, because it was a carrier of the divine, same as the ark and same as Mary. It carried Jesus, as he was, connected to the other world, if you like. To me, there are links there also to serpent worship, because the serpent in ancient times, the snake in ancient times, was seen as very holy for a great many reasons. And one of those reasons was that it was seen to resurrect. It would slither off into a dark place, a cave or a hole, and leave behind its shroud, its skin, and come out resurrected. Jesus, we know, was equated with the serpent that Moses held up in the wilderness. Moses again. There's the link again. Early images of Jesus show him as a serpent. Early images of Yahweh show that. The serpent's incredibly important, and of course the serpent is totally linked to the Enlightenment experience in a great many cultures, to the wisdom aspect and to the internal dialogue that we go into in altered states. So it makes perfect sense that it should be. It's only later that Christianity and Judaism took it and victimized it, if you like. So the shroud, incredibly important, must be. Reasons for that: is it because it did carry a man called Jesus, or some person who was holy? And what was the process to create that shroud, and how old is it? These are questions that I really wanted to get to the bottom of once I've been started down that road. And I can go into that in any way you want.
Before we do that, I just want to pull in a piece here and get your thoughts or reflections on it, your insight. I've been researching the Osiris device or pillar for a number of years, which features in Osiris's hieroglyph. It features a pillar called the Shudi pillar or Enlightenment pillar with a serpent levitating on it. And when that pillar is placed on top of another glyph that resembles in form and I believe function the biblical Ark of the Covenant, it forms the complete Osiris device. And so it seems as if the Egyptians were making that connection with the serpent, the ark, and this transformation or the resurrection of a man, in the Egyptian case, Osiris. But it's also clearly stated that Osiris is the Great Pyramid complex, the Giza complex, Rosto. And it's been speculated by some that there are hidden chambers within the Great Pyramid that have yet to be discovered, and we might even find this Osiris device inside the Great Pyramid. And one of the ideas I ask people to consider is to note the connection, the similarity between the setup of Solomon's Temple and the Great Pyramid and the role that setup played in the crucifixion of Jesus. You have an arrangement of 3 crosses. You can take out the symbol of the cross and insert the symbol of the star, and that's what you have at the Giza Plateau is 3 stars. When you look at the 3 pyramids from the top down, they appear to be 3 crosses or 3 stars. And what I want to ask you, Phil, is do you think it's possible that the image on the Shroud of Turin was formed at or within the Great Pyramid?
I think in my mind, it's more than possible.
Wow.
I don't necessarily know whether it was created within the Great Pyramid, but it would certainly make complete and utter sense. That said, the physical evidence from the shroud shows that it was from the area of Qumran, which is where the Essene brothers were. And me and you both know that the Essene were strongly Egyptian. I don't know how else you can say it. Anybody who denies that fact is living in cloud cuckoo land.
Well, Phil, let me just mention this. When you're in Egypt, they say Christianity is the Egyptian religion. Christianity is the Egyptian religion. And the fourth or fifth time you hear that, you finally get it. Oh, Christianity is the Egyptian religion with new names.
Totally. Absolutely. 100%. The Great Pyramid Complex there was no way was it to bury a man, dead man. It may have been to resurrect a man, as you say, in that transformative aspect. And the image that you emailed to me earlier of Osiris and Serapis, Isis and Serapis, sorry, which Serapis is, of course, Osiris anyway.
Which features the same face that you see on the Shroud of Turin, but only on the body of the serpent.
Absolutely. Now think about something. In the book, I point out that I was taken off to Portugal to meet a brotherhood who claimed to have been continuing the Baraka and claimed to have known all about this and know all about this for an awful long time and have roots in Egypt and cross religious boundaries. They all have to wear beards. They point out that each generation, each culture has a dual brotherhood, a warrior kind and a peaceful kind. And now your brain starts to think, what truth is there in this? The Essene had a brotherhood who were warrior types. We know them as zealots. The Sufis had brothers who were warrior types. The Templars were the warriors to the brothers of the Cistercians. All of these people had to wear beards. They all had to be in the image of the divine, which is, you've just pointed out, is Osiris. It's incredible story, and it's something that absolutely nobody has spoke about, apart from me and you, live.
Yeah, it's an incredible scenario when you're confronted with this image. You're told that the image on the Shroud of Turin is the holy face, the one and only image of the face of Jesus Christ. But that's not true, because this image that I sent to you and as the readers have seen in my books was an image of that exact face on the body of a serpent that was drawn in 1798, probably in Alexandria, Egypt, certainly Egypt, but likely Alexandria, by a savant in Napoleon's army. So this image predates the Shroud of Turin, the revelation of that face on the shroud, by 100 years, which means that the person who originally drew it must have seen that face, or the person who sculpted the bas-relief that the person drew must have seen that face. And what your work is suggesting here is that this is like an interdimensional face almost. This is the face of the divine that is repeated over and over and again, and you can document this for periods of thousands of years where that same face appears again and again. How do we explain that?
Absolutely correct. Even in the Bible it tells us the wise men will have beards and white hair, etc. And Egypt, as you know, the Pharaoh, even Hatshepsut, she had to have a beard. The beard is symbol of the wisdom and enlightenment, because it comes and derives from, in my opinion, physically, from the sun. If you remember the images of the Aten sun, the solar disk, you've got the arms, the hands stretching outward exponentially. The images of the sun in a great many places show these strands coming from it. And when you look into the word beard, and when you look into all the words for beards in different cultures, you find that it seems to always be linked to the sun, to the light. That doesn't mean that it is just the sun, but it's certainly pointing out a correlation to God, or the divine, the enlightened aspect. And, man can grow this on his face, incredibly. It's the face of God.
Yeah, let's link this to another concept that's so important to this whole notion of Solomon's temple as well as the ark. And I'm speaking of the worm, the serpent, called Shamir. Let's talk for a moment about the Shamir and what it is and why it's so important to make that connection.
Well, anybody who doesn't know about the Shamir, it's known as a worm, which, of course, in etymology comes from orm, or worm, which means serpent. It just means a worm is basically just a small snake in language. It was believed that no hand should touch the stones that created the temple, and so the shamir was used. And you can take that two ways, can't you? You can take that, which is my way, mostly, esoterically, which is no hands touch it because it wasn't made. It wasn't made physically. No hands touch this temple, which is truly important to connect to God. And you can also take it in a way that man may have manifested this internal esoteric truth and actually create physical things too. So did man create a device, maybe electrical or any other method, to cut stone, to do these things? I'm more of the esoteric leaning in that aspect from my researchers. But that's not to suggest that man doesn't manifest things, because he damn well does.
It seems as if that there is a connection or a linkage that's made between the initiate and the shamir, as if you have to embrace the energy of that serpent. As you describe, or as you chronicle, the shamir is referred to as the true source, the stone, the seed, the egg, the philosopher's stone, which resides in every one of us. Aren't all of those terms synonymous with Christ ultimately? And wouldn't this explain why
absolutely.
Jesus is portrayed on the body of a worm or a serpent, because he had become shamir?
Yes, you do. You become that serpent. And that image that you've shown, of course, shows male and female. We mustn't forget the female in this.
That's right.
You know, because if we're all too male, we'll all go around killing each other and probably not even getting off our backsides, because the female is the impetus too inside our own minds.
And so then this brings us around to one of your conclusions in the book, The Ark, the Shroud, and Mary, and that is, could it be, you wondered, that the image on the shroud was that of an adept who had been in a state of ecstasy and who had in fact emitted radiation? Let's talk about that, and how that person had embraced all of the philosopher's stone, the seed, the egg, all of these concepts embodying the cosmic power, and that enabled him to light up as perhaps no other human has done since.
Yeah, sure. Well, this in beauty is kind of a joining up of me and you, in a way, because it's the esoteric coming out and physically manifesting on a physical object. We can still actually touch the shroud. Most people have a problem because in the 80s, the so-called carbon-14 dating showed or proved that it was fake, a medieval fake. And, of course, others have gone on to suggest that Leonardo da Vinci created it. I'm not going to comment on that one, because I don't think Leonardo da Vinci would have had time to do all the things that people say he did. But the shroud is of a specific weave that is Syrian and of 1st century. It's of a specific plant from the correct area. It's had discovered in it pollen from plants that only grow in the area. It's had dirt found in it from the caves of Qumran. It's every single physical aspect about it points to 1st century and to the Essenes. Now, how could the carbon-14 dating have been screwed up? We have to ask these questions because this leads us to the answer. And how could it have been screwed up? Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, a wonderful doctor in America discovered a thing called bioplastic coating, which is a bacteria buildup and fungi buildup, which occurs every year on artifacts, and now means that most artifacts in the world are probably wrongly carbon dated, because they've all got this bioplastic coating. Secondly, if we accept the fact that this shroud was created by some form of radiation, that too would have screwed up any carbon-14 dating. So what is that radiation? Well, when you try to get into altered state of consciousness, when you try to access this enlightenment, as they call it, what scientists find is that people's body temperature rises. And this is because the atoms within the body excite. And what occurs is that the neutrons from within the atom escape. If you actually add onto the body an anointing oil of various forms, I spoke to scientists, you actually magnify that neutron radiation which is coming from the body. And crucifixion, beating, flagellation, all these things have been around for an awful long time, well before Christianity, and have been used to get people into altered states, because they believed the concept was that your soul would wish to escape your body. Amazingly, you can even find these same things still today in Africa in serpent-worshipping tribes, where they still flagellate with whips that they say are the holy serpent. They pin the serpents to crosses, they crucify them, and use parts of their bodies for healing. So it's all linked to the serpent, and it's all linked to this enlightenment process, which raises the body temperature, causes neutron radiation, and imparts an image onto a shroud. It would also answer all the other problems that you have with the shroud. First of all, there's no pigment, no paint pigment, so it couldn't have been painted. The clay that people are claiming was used to create the shroud has not been found on the shroud at all. The images on both sides, that would have been incredibly difficult even today to get that to line up. And the man in the shroud he's been looked at by all kinds of different scientists, and they've all said this is a real man, this isn't a painting, who's gone through the process as depicted in the Bible. You're left with the question, who is the man? And all I can say, in my opinion, is that this man is an adept who was within the Essene in Qumran. The same brothers we were talking about earlier.
And it gives a whole new meaning to the flagellation and the crucifixion. This is a person who's going through this so that he can achieve this state of ecstasy, not so that he can suffer for us. This is a huge gulf in understanding and an enormous misconception if it proves to be correct. And I think that you're on the line with this, and you're finding some phenomenal research that's being done on this at Harvard University, going back to the research of Thomas Phillips and how radiated neutrons could have radiated the shroud and come from this process of transformation within us. And again, it goes to this idea that all of us can do that. And as I said in the introduction, Phil, I'm so intrigued by this because so many believe that we are in an end times and that a figure will appear, according to Jewish legend, who does have to get that anointing oil you just talked about, who has to recover the Ark of the Covenant, who has to put these pieces together so that this whole drama can be reenacted. And it's been a tremendous pleasure to talk with you, because for years I've been on the rod and the wand aspect of it, the holy scepter that goes with the Ark of the Covenant, may in fact be Aaron's rod. And here you are coming in with some really profound research on the Ark of the Covenant itself. And I'm going to be looking forward to meeting you at Chet Snow's conference in Tempe, Arizona in November. So tell us, just in the few moments we have left, what's up for you in the time in between. You're working on a new book called Gateway to the Other World, and can you tell us briefly about the path of research you're following now? Well,
Gateways to the World is finished and will be out in December. There's a book coming out at the end of June called Secret Societies, which is more the dark side of man's mind rather than this enlightenment side. In 2 days, I will be in Australia, where I'll be speaking at the International Scientific and Metaphysical Symposium and doing some TV and radio over there. I've never been there, so that's going to be fun. I've just finished a DVD called Quantum Mind of God, which is very interesting indeed. And I am currently just finished off a book for next year, which all I can say is I think it's going to be incredibly big. It's called The Bond Code.
The Bond Code, awesome.
It's all about James Bond.
Ah, wonderful. That ought to be fun. Yeah, there's so much there, going back to Ian Fleming's occult interest in World War II and his secret society connections, all of that.
Oh, yeah.
Very cool. I
Yes.
mean, what you just rattled off is a lifetime's worth of work for so many authors. Like you, I kind of get this sense that you just can't work fast enough these days. There is an acceleration that's going on, and it's been our pleasure to have you on Dreamland today to share your connections, and we'll look forward to talking with you again.
Thank you. I've been humbled and honored.
Thank you, Philip. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. Next up, Linda Moulton Howe.
Today, Linda Moulton Howe is going to be talking about two things. First, a weird astronomical story that doesn't happen to be true, then one that is true, that is absolutely astonishing. Remember the Elmendorf beast? Well, I certainly do, because we did DNA testing on that animal and had some trouble getting honest results. Now she's back with another animal that has been found in Texas by some people who have looked at it very, very carefully, and this, wow, is this weird. Well, listen up.
That is right, Whitley. And more people are depending on the Internet for their daily news updates. but there is no overall web editor to do a reality check on content. So finding out what is factual is an ever-increasing challenge. Today on Dreamland, before facts about that strange animal in Texas, I want to set the record straight on a headline that has been circulated on the web for weeks and is false, according to astronomers. The headline states, quote, "Scientists now know we're not from here," and there is a big exclamation point. The author is listed as Dan Eden of ViewZone.com. Mr. Eden begins, quote, "Imagine the shock of growing up in a loving family with people that you call mom and dad, and then suddenly learning that you are actually adopted. This same sense of shock came as scientists announced that the sun, moon, our planet, and its siblings were not born into the familiar band of stars known as the Milky Way galaxy, but we actually belong to a strange formation with the unfamiliar name of the Sagittarius Dwarf Galaxy," unquote. That article quotes two astrophysicists at the University of Virginia as using infrared maps of our Milky Way galaxy to confirm that the reason the Milky Way goes at an angle across the Earth's night skies is because our solar system does not actually belong to the Milky Way. According to this Dan Eden, the University of Virginia astrophysicists have confirmed that the Milky Way actually belongs, that we are not in the Milky Way, but that our solar system actually belongs to the Sagittarius Dwarf Galaxy. Well, I called the University of Virginia Astronomy Department and I talked with Professor Stephen Majewski, lead author of a paper published in the Astrophysical Journal entitled "New Map of the Milky Way Shows Our Galaxy to be a Cannibal," unquote. The date of that paper, December 20th, 2003, 4 years ago. The Astrophysical Journal article was about how the Sagittarius Dwarf Galaxy is 10,000 times smaller than the mass of our Milky Way and is being absorbed by the Milky Way, a common process in this universe where larger galaxies eat smaller ones and grow larger. Professor Majewski and his colleague, Professor Michael Skrutsky, explained that our solar system and Milky Way only briefly and periodically pass through Sagittarius debris. And one of those times happens to be now. And they say, quote, "Remarkably, stars from Sagittarius are now raining down onto our present position in the Milky Way. Stars from an alien galaxy are relatively near us," unquote. Nowhere in that Astrophysical Journal article of 2003 do the scientists suggest that our solar system is from the Sagittarius Dwarf Galaxy. Further, astrophysicists know that solar systems have evolved in this galaxy at many different angles to the galactic plane. Bottom line, a 2003 Science Journal article gets resurrected 4 years later in 2007 with the sensational claim that our solar system is not really from the Milky Way, while in fact the original science was about how the Milky Way, that includes our solar system, is big enough to eat other smaller galaxies. Well, big things in this universe eating smaller things is an ancient observation, from galaxies to chickens eating earthworms. One longtime predator of chickens has been foxes and coyotes. But beginning back in 1995, farmers in the El Yunque rainforest region of Puerto Rico reported finding chickens, rabbits, goats, sheep, and even dogs with quarter-inch wide puncture holes that did not bleed, but usually left the domestic animals dead as if the blood had been sucked out of them. That description led to the name chupacabras, which means goat sucker in Spanish. The descriptions were of a gray-colored creature whose skin had spots and very little hair. Some eyewitnesses said the creature could walk on its hind legs, standing about 5 feet tall, and then go down on all fours and run rapidly, even jumping 6-foot-high fences. The chupacabras attacks expanded from Puerto Rico to the southern United States and Mexico in 1996. Then in May, 2 men and a woman in different Mexico locations were attacked by something they said felt like plastic and left bloodless puncture marks in their human arms. After that, the chupacabras phenomenon seemed to just stop suddenly by June of 1996, until 7 years ago in 2003. More strange, unidentified animals were reported and photographed in Maryland after more puncture wound attacks on domestic animals. The next year, in May 2004, in Elmendorf, Texas, not far from San Antonio, another gray, unidentified creature was shot and photographed, but no forensic testing was done. 5 months after that, in October 2004, another nearly identical gray creature was also shot in Pollock, Texas, north of Galveston. And now, on Saturday, July 14th, 2007, 5 miles south of Cuero, Texas, which is an hour south of San Antonio, 2 similar strange gray animals were found again, this time apparently hit by cars. One of those 2 was in front of the 7 Sea Ranch, owned by Phyllis and Steve Carrion, who have ranched in Cuero since 2002. Phyllis also is a board-certified nutritional consultant and owns the 7 Sea Sports clothing shop in Cuero. The roadkill of what she calls, quote, a bizarre creature with short, long legs with short front legs and long back legs came as an answer to what had been killing her chickens and probably causing her kittens to disappear over the past couple of years.
A lot of people have thought that I've just seen this thing within the last month or couple of weeks, but I have been trying to capture this creature for about the last 2.5 years. My sister first saw it about 2.5 years ago at our ranch. We were in Africa, and she had come to check on our place, and when she was leaving, she saw this really strange creature. Well, when we got back from Africa, I'm driving in our pasture, and I happen to look over, and I see this bizarre-looking creature running through the pasture. And what caught my attention on it was its gallop. It looked as if its front legs had been dismembered, broken. There was something about it that the front end of the animal was much lower than the back end. And as I watched it, it ran behind a barn that we have on our ranch, ran into an opening, just stopped and looked at me. And at that time, I got a better view of it and could see that it appeared to be a hairless type of creature that had a very big snout with very large ears, 2 very large teeth from the top coming down, 2 very big teeth from the bottom coming up, both outside of the jaw and the gum line so that you could actually were visible. And he darted off. That was my first exposure to it. Well, of course, I called my sister and told her, and she's like, that's exactly what I had seen on your place. So I began losing kittens. We were trying to get some kittens at our ranch house, and to try and keep the snakes away. And every time I would get kittens and actually put them outside, they would vanish. So I started videoing in their yard to see what was coming up. Well, I never could get anything, so I kept losing kittens. I had gone through 8 kittens. And this is over about a 1.5 year period. So finally I decided to get some chickens. I had chickens set, and actually on video, I caught bobcats coming up to take the chicken, and I got wild dogs coming up to take the chicken. But what was the most unusual is that it appeared when my videotape would run out, something would come up, kill the chicken, suck the blood out of it, and leave the chicken lay. So I have been very passionate at trying to find this animal, getting it on video, trying to capture it, at some point trying to get it so that we could find out what it was. After going through about 28 chickens, and still it was very, very elusive, I had almost given up on it because it had actually been about 8 months that I had not had any sighting of it. Now, what has been unusual is that when my husband would come back in from overseas and spend 30 days at home, he would be on the ranch all day long, every day, and never saw it. So the family really began teasing me, going, oh, my gosh, it's this chupacabra that you're seeing, and it's this mythical creature. And I'm like, well, whatever you call it, it is very, very ugly. I started looking at some stories that were on our San Antonio news of people actually finding these chupacabras. The biggest problem appeared, though, is no one ever had one that could be tested. So I always said, if I ever have a chance to get one, I'm getting it because I want to find out what it is. If it's killing my chickens and possibly taking my kittens, it is doing something else to some other animals. Lo and behold, a neighbor behind me who had just recently been into my store to say that he had seen this creature running in and out of our pasture called me and said, you are not going to believe this, but someone has hit one, and I have it, and I want you to come look at it and tell me if it's what you've been seeing. So, of course, I jump in my truck and run over to his ranch, and it's exactly it. I said, that is exactly what I have seen. It was much smaller, but I said it's the same thing. No hair, the big teeth, short front legs, the bigger back legs, the whole scenario fit. While I was talking to him, someone called me and said one had been hit in front of my ranch. So I get in my vehicle, drive back to our ranch again. Lo and behold, there is this one that I am not believing because it's like, this has got to be the one that I was seeing.
Right.
It was a much larger animal than the first one in that the first one, I'm going to say, probably weighed about 20 pounds. This one ranged more in the 35-pound. So I picked it up, and I brought it back to my house and started taking pictures of it and ended up getting most of it out and saving the head and the front part of the body so that I, at some point, could find someone that would be interested enough to help me try and figure out what this is. I contacted one of my friends who was a veterinarian in Victoria. I had him look at it, and the more we started to examine the animal, we definitely came to the conclusion this was a very strange creature. The short front legs, the paws had a very big pad on the front legs. The back legs appeared to be much longer and had no pads on them at all compared to the front. It had a very long snout with what we said was a slight overbite on the top. What we found so unusual is that when we lifted the gums up, in between the two big teeth that stuck out over the bottom jaw, there was no teeth at all in that space, nor was there any indication that there had been teeth that were ground down. It was pure gum. On the bottom, where the teeth come up, we found the exact same scenario. It was just gum.
The overbite teeth and the two teeth from the bottom up may be what is being used to puncture and suck the blood.
Possibly. That is correct. Now, I lived in Africa for 5 years, and I have been back to Africa 3 times, and we have hunted in Africa. So I have seen a lot of African animals and some very weird ones. Never have I seen one like this. When we looked at the pictures, and when we sent pictures off to the Texas Department, Texas Parks and Wildlife, their reaction was, oh, this is a mangy coyote, which frustrated me because we're like, no, this is not a mangy coyote. What the veterinarian, Dr. Travis Shore, and I also thought was unusual was that when animals are killed or die, their eyes, for the most part, are open. When the biologist first looked at this at Texas Parks and Wildlife and the veterinarian, they're like, well, why did you close the eyes on it, Phyllis? And I didn't. They were closed when I first got to the animal because I did an examination of everything before I even touched the animal while it was still sitting in the road after a vehicle had hit it. So we kind of thought that was bizarre. Now, I had a friend of mine who practices in a town near here who is a physician. She came by and looked at it yesterday with me. And the more we just look at this thing, the more we find things just truly bizarre. The iris of the eye appears to be blue, which, talking to some biologists, and you could probably confirm this, it is not unusual that a wolf would have a blue eye. Mm-hmm. So we're wondering if it is not some type of a cross between possibly a wild dog, possibly a wolf, maybe a coyote. But the short legs in the front has us baffled.
Yeah.
Because it's like, what could that be a cross of?
Why did you not take that whole fresh animal to a veterinarian pathologist?
There are none in our area, and what has been extremely disheartening to me was that when we contacted the Texas Parks and Wildlife, we had a game warden come by my shop and he looked at the pictures, and his comment was, yeah, well, I'll take him to Austin and we'll see. Well, he went to Austin and he called me from Austin and said, yeah, they're just saying it's kind of a wild dog or something like that, and discredited the rest of the story. They never even offered to come look at what I had to even show any interest in it, which has disappointed me. And there was an article in our local newspaper today that said that I was basically disappointed that we have not had any more interest in it from our Texas Parks and Wildlife. So maybe perhaps we have this creature here that is a mutation or a different breed of something that maybe it is the chupacabra.
What is left of the animal that you have in your possession now?
What I have right now is the hide from about the mid-back all the way, including the head, and down the legs. So I have the front half of the creature, and of course, to be honest with you, what my ultimate goal would be with this is that I would love to mount it with a chicken in its mouth and hang it up in our game room. Because while we have a lot of, we've been all over the world hunting, we've got some very unusual mounts. This one, we feel hands down, would probably draw the most attention.
I think I would agree, and I'm curious what happened to the organs and the skeleton.
I have all of the bones. I laid it out in the pasture. And it's funny, a lot of people said to me, Phyllis, why didn't you cut the stomach open and look? And I'm like, it just goes back to my days in Africa and when we hunted in Africa. That's one of the things that the Africans do. For those that are listening to this, if they've hunted there, they will note that you skin the complete animal without ever opening it up because they don't want to have any demons. It's just an African belief, I think. And when I was looking at it, I'm like, I'm not going to do anything to this animal other than take what I think we need off of it to help me identify something.
Are the organs in that carcass, what happened to it?
They just were eaten up in the pasture, basically.
Okay, so you just left it out there.
Yes, I did. After I finished everything and I took off the front part of it and all of that, yes, I laid it out in the pasture.
Okay.
What I found was very unusual that it took 3 days for any buzzards to even come near it.
And you can see photographs of this Cuero, Texas, strange hairless animal compared to the Pollock, Texas, and Elmendorf, Texas cases at my news website, www.earthfiles.com. At the top of the headlines page is a hot link to this report, and all the photographs seem to be of the same type of creature. Right now, Phyllis Canyon says that she would like to have DNA sequencing of a tooth and hide from the one she has partially preserved at her Cuero Ranch to find out once and for all, is this a hairless coyote infected by severe mange, overbite, and short front legs, or is this a new animal species or a strange hybrid combination?
Well, Linda, thank you very much, and I am sure as soon as that question is answered, if it is indeed answerable, we will hear from you about it in great detail, and it's extremely exciting. I think there's a great chance here that we may find out something very amazing about this animal. Thank you very much.
It covers the whole thing perfectly, and was chosen for that respect. You can get down an awful lot of roots with this, and I did try to cover them as much as possible in the book. Specifically the relic. Is it a real thing? Did it ever exist? And speaking to several scholars about it, Jordan Maxwell and others such as that, who categorically believe that it never existed and that it is purely an esoteric device within the Bible, probably stolen from their Egyptian sojourn. The esoteric side of it is what I concentrate more on in the book, although I did do a few things with a local university with regard to the energy aspect, which I know that you're so interested in. With respect to the battery, could this thing build up a charge, for instance? So we did go through that, and we did do some virtual technology to see if that was the case.
I'd like to go back to a really interesting, an eye-opening experience that you had yourself at Winchester Cathedral when you came upon an image of Moses and the Jews carrying the Ark of the Covenant. Talk about that experience and how it changed your perception and altered your path of research.
Well, this is a strange story. See, I had no intention whatsoever of writing a book about the Ark of the Covenant, the Shroud, or Mary. None whatsoever. My path was taking me a completely different way at the time. And I was there giving a speech, but Winchester is a peculiar place in England. Anybody who knows English history will know that in the 16th and 17th century, we gave the Catholic Church a good kicking and booted them out of the country, basically, and became what's known as Protestantism. And it's a very German thing. And we created the Church of England, and there were pockets in England that were still very Catholic, and Winchester was one of them. And the reason that that's important is because these areas in England that were still Catholic have maintained a lot of symbolism within their structures, within their churches, whereas the other ones, we kind of whitewashed over the paintings and smashed the windows and broke up the sculptures. But the other thing in Winchester is, which I didn't put in the book, but I was researching an ancestor of mine, Bishop Stephen Gardiner. And there was a couple of bishops in my histories. I've got a very strange genealogical history, which goes right back to Roslin, amazingly.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, well, Roslin itself, most people will know that, but Roslin is built upon a brae, a Scottish word for field or an area of land. And it's called Gardiner's Brae. And that's my ancestor that named that place. Very interesting indeed. So we have some heavy discussions about genetic memory, so that's quite interesting. But Stephen Gardiner was there, and so I was trying to find his mausoleum. And the pictures that you see in the book, and what I talk about in the book, is this mausoleum where on one side there is an image of Moses carrying, and the people of Israel, carrying the ark out of Egypt with the Great Pyramids in the background. And on the other side of the mausoleum is Jesus emerging from a cup.
The ages. What is this rod or wand, and what is the Ark of the Covenant? Are these actual technologies or merely metaphors and allegories, symbols for a mysterious, perhaps divine power? Joshua 6 tells us the Israelites used the ark to destroy Jericho. What military power does this device utilize? And who would most like to find it today? And when they find it, is the ark empty or will it be full? Here today to enlighten us about the esoteric mysteries of the Ark of the Covenant is author Philip Gardiner. Philip is an author and researcher of several books, including The Shining Ones, The Serpent Grail, Gnosis, The Secret of Solomon's Temple Revealed, and now The Ark, The Shroud, and Mary. Philip's website is gardinersworld.com. That's spelled GARDINERS world.com. Philip, welcome to Dreamland.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a great pleasure to have you, Phil. I tried to read The Ark, The Shroud, and Mary at the airport and on the plane while traveling to Florida recently, but everywhere I went, every time I held it in my hand, people came up to me and said, now that looks like an interesting book, and a flight attendant literally dragged me to the back of the plane to talk about it. So, she's like me, says, I always wanted to know about that stuff, and I'll bet you get a lot of that, don't you, Phil?
That's very nice to hear. Yes, I get a fair bit, yeah, when I'm out speaking and what have you. But most of the time I'm out alone, researching. So I'm kind of unrecognisable in most places, thankfully, still.
Right, but the subject matter is just so alluring, and it's funny that on one leg of this trip, the guy beside me was reading Graham Hancock's book, The Fingerprint of the Gods, and of course, Graham's Sign and the Seal is like perhaps the benchmark book on the Ark of the Covenant, which was published in the early 1990s. Did Graham's work influence you in your research or your quest to learn the secrets of the Ark of the Covenant?
I'd be lying to say that I didn't read Graham's book several times over, and it's really become the place you have to start when you're looking for the Ark of the Covenant for a great many people. So yes, it did, certainly. It even took me off to Ethiopia. So after I'd finished the book, so what I'd already found is in the book. But when I got to Ethiopia and to Axum itself, and I got a translator with me, but I'd learnt a few words, and I asked the guy, the guardian, if you like, at the church, do you have the Ark of the Covenant in here? And because I'd asked him in his own language, he says, "No, we've got a slab of stone." So it's what they perceive to be the ark. They still call it the ark. To them, it's still the connection point to God.
What word, Phil, would you say best describes the ark in your opinion? The crucible, the casket, chest, instrument, device, relic? Where can we begin this conversation in a single word to describe the ark?
Oh, that's not that easy a question.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, good one. Personally, I'd call it the ark, but because that, to me, from etymology, the language, the science of language.
Even weirder than the Elmendorf beast, and there are photographs on earthfiles.com. But before that, William Henry interviews Philip Gardiner about, among other things, bioelectric fields found around the Shroud of Turin. It is absolutely fascinating. And for our subscribers, I have a second meditation in the new Crop Circle Meditation series. And I have to be honest with you folks, this is getting very, very amazing and frankly awesome, because I was actually working on a meditation about triads and triangles, which is a very important starting place, when suddenly over Stratford in England, a formation of UFOs showed up, seen by hundreds of people, that assumed a triangular pattern. So this is the pattern we're going to be using for this meditation, but it doesn't end there, because almost at the same time, another crop circle formed that we will talk about next week that relates to the gateway that we talked about the first time and to this triad. I have to be honest with you. I think we've got some teachers. And now here's William.
Welcome, everyone. According to the Jewish legend of the forerunner of the Messiah, during the end time, a figure known as the peacemaker will appear who will assist the Messiah in carrying out 7 wonders, including showing the 3 holy vessels of Solomon's temple, the Ark of the Covenant, the flask of manna, the cruse of sacred oil, all of which disappeared mysteriously. He will lay the holy scepter, the rod or wand, before the Messiah, who will wave it and perform miracles revealing the ultimate secrets of the